In fierce dragon, riding competition, I was knocked off and fell from the sky. Chapter 20. 2 weeks of tough, back-breaking training went by and we had all improved our combat skills and teamwork skills tremendously. Shade and I even grew to consider each other as friends. Well, sometimes. I whacked out Shade's dorm room door with as much force as I could. I swear to God, if you don't get your cocky ass out here into seconds I will. The door immediately swung open to reveal Shade standing in the doorway with his signature smirk. "What's wrong, princess?" he asked arrogantly. I practically felt my jaw hit the floor as I stared at his fake, innocent face. "You know fully well what's wrong," I shouted, poking him in the chest. Shade had taken it upon himself to put wilderberries, the supernatural world's stronger version of dyes, into my shampoo. So long story short, I had a weirdly murky green-colored hair. Yes, it will come out, but since my hair was white, it will take twice as long. Shade leant lazily on the doorframe and grinned widely down at me. "Nice hair," he laughed. That was it. I lunged forwards, I emptied his chest and sent him flying back into his room. "You stupid!" I screamed, punching his chest. He lay there frozen for a few seconds, allowing me to take my anger out before he caught my hands. "You done?" he asked with another smirk. I looked down at him and grinned, his eyes wide and in fear as he realized that I was planning something. "Not even chose," I grinned, jumping up of him. He got up and watched warily as I walked back towards the door. "Watch your back." This is what I warned, flicking my green hair over my shoulder. I darted down into the common room. "Hey guys," I called to Chase and Orpheus as I darted past them and up into my own room. When I entered the room, my eyes scanned around for Thea. "Hey Thea," I exclaimed when I spotted her sitting by the fire with Alexis. I darted over to them and thumped down onto the ground. "Could you do me a HUOGE favor?" I pleaded. Someone's in a good mood. "Sure, why not?" she replied with amusement. "Do you think you could get me some Essentia Demon IUM? Please. Essentia Demon IUM. Or Demon Essence is a special herb that makes any non-demon blooded species break out in an itchy rash. It is not very harmful, so it is the perfect way for me to get back at Shade." "Who's it for?" she asked, touching her white eyebrow. "Who do you think?" I laughed, pointing at my hair. She nodded her head and got to her feet. "You're in luck," she laughed, walking over to her bed. She rummaged through her drawers until she pulled out a small wooden box. "It's tasteless, so put it in his water," she instructed, handing me the box. "Thank you," I sang happily. Coming downstairs, I asked them both. "No, we're gonna stay here for a bit." "See you later," replied Thea. "Sure," I said excitedly, nodding my head. She shook her head in amusement and watched me leave the room. I walked back down into the common room and joined Chase and Orpheus, who were still sitting on the couch, reading their own books. "Hey again," I said happily. "Aurora, you know I love you, but green is really not your best color," laughed Chase in surprise as he glared at my hair. I rolled my eyes and let out a sarcastic laugh. "What happened?" questioned Orpheus. "Shade," I said plainly. His face dropped a bit, and he shifted it in his seat uncomfortably. I guess he still wasn't entirely fond of him. I spent some time catching them up on how I was going to get him back. Chase smirked mischievously and Orpheus just grinned at me. I heard light footsteps against the stone floor and became surrounded by Shade's electricity. It was no longer painful in any way. It just felt like a weird tingling sensation that affected my mood in different ways depending on Shade's mood. Although I still hadn't picked up enough courage to tell him about it, decided to deal with it. "He's coming. Act natural," exclaimed Chase, leaning into the seat and pulling up his book. I looked at Chase's attempt at acting natural and sighed. "The book is the wrong way around, you idiot," I whispered, flipping the book around. I quickly slumped into the sofa next to Orpheus and pretended to look at something in his book. "Hey," greeted Shade nervously. I shot him a glare to make it seem like I was still mad at him, and Chase gave him a small wave. Shade walked further into the room and sat down next to me. I glared at his smug face and narrowed my eyes. "I'm getting water. Anyone else want a glass?" I asked plainly. Chase and Orpheus nodded. I began to walk to the kitchen when Shade's voice stopped me. "Don't forget about me, princess," he called after me. How could I? Not showing him the huge grin that was on my face. I poured the water and added the herbs cleverly to my own drink before walking back into the room with them on a tray. I passed them along to the boys and sat back down. Shade sniffed his glass suspiciously and looked at me. I avoided his eye contact and adjusted my sitting position. "Swap with me," he said confidently. I put on the best horrified and startled expression that I could and reluctantly swapped our glasses. I watched with satisfaction as he downed half of the glass. "Nice try," he smirked, taking another sip of his water. I burst out laughing and mirrored his smug grin before downing my whole glass. Shade looked at me in horror and spat out whatever water was left in his mouth. But it was too late. "Essentially a demon, are you?" "Miu," smugly. "But that means," he stuttered as realization. His mouth gaped open, and he set the glass down and ran up to his room. I cheered happily and high-fived each hastened Orpheus. I honestly didn't think he would fall for it, but he did. "Did you see his face?" asked Orpheus, curling over in a fit of laughter. I laughed with them before I got up and made my way up to his room, knowing that the rest should have developed by now. I opened the door to see Shade shirtless in front of his full-length mirror. My cheeks reddened as I took in his perfectly muscled, well-defined body. I moved further into the room and shook my head, ready to gloat in my victory. "You got the wrong urge," Shade, turning to face me. I looked over his body and confusion flooded over me. There was not one mark on him. "No, Shade, that's impossible," I gasped, spinning him around forcefully. I inspected his back, but again, there was nothing. His skin was perfectly clear. My blood turned to ice as realization set in. The herbs will only not affect you if you have demon blood. But that would me. No, I know he can be an asshole, but there's no way that Shade is a demon, I thought. Although I knew that that was the only possible answer. "Shade, look at me," I said gently. He turned around and the color flooded away from his face as he clicked on to what was happening. I allowed a beam of pure starlight to flow out of my hand and shined it onto Shade's distraught face. His red eyes glowed brightly and then deepened to the point where the black almost consumed the red. "I'm part demon. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Already knowing the answer, I nodded my head. An unusual expression formed on his face, making his eyes return to their usual bright red color. I hated seeing him this way. Shade was the type of guy who had strong walls built to prevent others seeing his emotions, but here he was standing in front of me. Vulnerable. "It's okay," I cooed, not really knowing what to do. "No, it's not. I'd always known that I wasn't normal, but I never fully understood why. Why everyone important to me left. I have no family. They were the first people to leave me, and I was always clueless to why I was never accepted. Clueless to why everyone left me. So after a while, I stopped caring. Stopped trying to understand. But now I do understand. I'm a monster," he said slowly, looking at the ground. My heart suddenly felt heavy. I looked at the broken boy before me and held back my own tears. I walked forwards and embraced him in a hug for the first time. The electricity surged through me at our close contact, and he tensed slightly before pulling me closer to his body. "You're not a monster," I said firmly. "I can't lose anyone else. Especially you, princess," he said, keeping his voice surprisingly steady. "You won't lose me. I promise," I said quietly. He relaxed into the hold and sobbed quietly into my hair. I stayed close to him, allowing myself to be his comfort until he pulled away and looked me in the eyes. He had regained his controlled expression and smiled weakly down at me. "Thank you." I smiled back at him and stayed to keep him company until I was sure that he was really okay. Our stupid pranks had ended up revealing something that none of us could have imagined. Shade was part demon. But one thing I did know is that I was going to keep my promise. He would never lose me. Not without a fight. Chapter 21. I lay awake that night thinking of Shade. I had seen a different part of him that I would never have imagined existed a few weeks ago. I regretted not trying harder with him from the start, but a part of me still wanted to know why he acted so hatefully towards me when we first met. Was it something that I did? I shrugged off my thoughts and sat up, taking the prophecy book out of my drawer. I skimmed through its pages back to the prophecy about me, and shade and read over the words again. Blood of the angel corrupted by love. I had no idea what this meant. It could reference Sebastian in some way, but why? He has nothing to do with me, and shade over than the fact we have to destroy him. Blood of the demon rejected and malevolent. I read over the same sentence a few times. This must apply to Shade since he has demon blood, but who else? He said that his parents abandoned him when he was young, but even so, I think he'd know if his father was a demon. I shook my head and let out a frustrated groan before continuing. The black wolf blessed with light. My suspicions about this were confirmed as soon as I saw Shade's wings. They were pure white, and he had a black wolf form, so it does make sense, but I assume there is a much stronger meaning to it. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Just because he is part demon, it doesn't mean that he is evil. The white wolf cursed with darkness. Again, my wolf form was white and my wings black. Besides, I was basically consumed with darkness when I learned to control my wings. I think that this scared me the most. Did I really have darkness inside me? Sure, I know everyone does, but to have a prophecy written about it, it must be important. I continued to read the rest of the prophecy, but it made little sense to me. I closed the book and threw it back into the drawer. Why doesn't anything about my life make sense? I swear I'd give anything just to be normal again. I allowed myself to fall back into laying position and gobble of frustrated twists and turns. I finally drifted off into a dreamless sleep. When I awoke the next morning, I immediately sprinted onto the bathroom. I grabbed the sides of the sink and looked into the mirror to see that my green hair had returned back to its original color. I smiled happily and washed my face with cold water. The regional games are in 2 days. All normal classes had been cancelled to train for them. Even the elite team training is on hold since Asher is helping to train some of the events. I ran back into the room and changed into my combat uniform. Aurora, what are you doing up so early? Groaned Sylvia. I popped my head around the curtain and smiled warmly at her groggy appearance. I'm part of the dragon team. Remember? I laughed watching her rub her eyes. Right. Have fun, she yawned, turning back over. I laughed quietly to myself and pulled on my jacket before heading downstairs. I could hear a distant mumble of hushed voices as I walked down the spiral staircase. I turned the corner to see Orpheus, Shade and Chase waiting for me. Verity had decided not to join the team for some reason. I think she said something about not wanting to die, but I don't know what she's worried about. You don't stay dead. The protective barriers prevent fatal injury. Hey, they chorused. I gave them a small wave and quickly caught the sandwich that Chase threw at me just before it hit me in the face. I said sarcastically. Sorry, he laughed. I gave him a smile and headed out of the door with them following close behind. We walked down to the training grounds to see Exor standing in the middle holding a bunch of flags. When we approached him, I saw that he had a really serious expression on his face. I held back off, remembering how offensive he got when telling us that our region hadn't won the team into years. Is everyone here? Good, he asked without waiting for a reply. I looked at Chase, who was grinning unknowingly at me. Listen up. We cannot lose again. The Fire region has won twice in a row, so if they win again we will lose our dignity, okay? He began competitively. I only expect the best from you guys. Besides, the dragon teams offer the most points for your region, so fly fearlessly and bring home the trophy so we can rub it in Felix's. I mean, the Fire region, smug faces, he exclaimed, raising his voice. A couple of people cheered and began calling their dragons. And have fun. I laughed, drawing Axel's attention. His eyes wide and he rubbed the back of his neck. Yes, that he shouted half-heartedly. I laughed at his behavior and called Obsidian using my mind. I couldn't really explain it, but somehow it works. He always finds me. Axel quickly organized us into 2 teams, and our team positions, which included chasers, the riders who capture the flags, guardians, the chasers throw them the flags and they have to keep them from the other team, defenders, they follow the guardians and help to protect the flags, assailants, these attack the opposing team's flyers and try to get them out of the game. If you hit the ground, you are out and cannot Enter the game. I was a chaser along with Chase, since his name apparently meant that he was born for the position, along with a few other people that I didn't really know. While Orpheus and Shade were both defenders, a booming roar sounded above us and I looked up to see our dragons circling us. "Pull your dragons down," in an orderly fashion instructed Axel, stepping away from us all slightly. Remembering the new trick I taught him, Obsidian dropped down and flew full speed towards me, skimming over the grass. Axel's face drained of its color, and he jumped back out of the way, letting out a high-pitched shriek. I laughed quietly and grabbed onto Obsidian as he flew past. He did a sharp turn and flew back past Axel with me still holding onto the side of him. I gave Axel a mock salute and swung myself onto Obsidian's back. I flew up towards the top of the field, where the other dragons were flying around, and waited for everyone to get on their dragons. Axel flew up on Naystana and flew a lap around us all. He flew past me, tapped his hand on chest dramatically while shaking his head to represent me giving him a heart attack. He stopped in front of us and Naystana let out a while that echoed around the field. "Everyone into position," he ordered. Chapter 22. After a long, breakless, 3-hour training session, we all stumbled hungrily out to the hold to get food, my stomach growling loudly as we sluggishly walked through the corridors. "That wasn't so bad," exclaimed Axel cheerfully. We all glared at him and watched in disbelief as he sprung by the side of us, still full of energy. "What?" he questioned offensively as he took in our sulky faces. I shook my head at him and sighed as we approached the hall. I took in a deep breath and smiled happily at the smell of all different sorts of foods flowing out of the doors. We pushed them open and sat at our usual table while Axel went to sit with his friends from his own year. Food was already positioned on the tables ready for us. I immediately grabbed a piece of bread and shoved it in my mouth, mentally thanking the cook's organization. I've never been so happy to see foods I'd chase. Taking a bite out of a chicken strip, I rolled my eyes and took a big gulp of water. "I'm sure you say that every time we eat," said Orpheus, taking the words right out of my mouth. Chase shrugged at the comment and continued to stuff his face with chicken. "I can't believe that we're still doing the games," complained Shade, changing the subject with the demons building up for an attack. "We should be focusing on more training," he continued, setting his cup onto the table. "I was really looking forward to the house games, but I do have to admit, Shade has a point. Isn't the fate of the whole school more important than a victory?" "You're starting to sound like Asher," voiced Orpheus. "Well, Asher has his priorities straight," scoffed Shade. The table fell into an awkward silence. I continued eating and watched as Orpheus picked up a blood bag. He took a long sip of it and his eyes turned silver, making those weird marks appear on his face. "Since when do you drink blood?" It may seem like a stupid question, but because Orpheus was a vampire, dragon rider hybrid, he can't survive off human food as well as blood, so he usually stays away from the stuff because he tends to lose control. He blinked a few times, allowing his eyes to return to their normal color. "It makes me stronger, so the principal told me to start drinking it to prepare for the war." His fangs still visible. "But don't you have control issues?" asked Shade, rolling his eyes. "Yeah, but I can't exactly harm anyone here. Humans don't enter the school's borders," he replied, clearly annoyed. I finished eating and looked over to Shade, who had returned to his usual blocked off self. I recently discovered that if I focused hard enough I could feel Shade's basic emotions. Not as strong as the bond between Obsidian and I, but it was still there. I know it's weird, but I can only do it with him. It must be another side effect of the prophecy. I began to read him through the connection and had to bite onto my cheek to stop myself from gasping. He was in pain. It was an emotional pain, but it was so strong. Just tapping into our little connection had me wanting to burst out in tears, and this was only a hint of what he was going through. How could he look so calm? So normal. He must have been hiding his emotions his whole life to be this good. I quickly exited his mind and sighed as relief flooded through me in a wave of calmness as all the pain and worry diffused out of me. I stood up from the table and looked down at everyone's confused faces. "I'm gonna go and see if Kai needs some help sorting out the dragons," I lied convincingly. I pushed my chair under the table and walked up to Shade casually. "Come with me." I asked sternly. He instantly got to his feet, realizing that he didn't have a choice. I smiled at Chase and Orpheus and gave a little wave before swiftly leaving the room, Shay following behind me. "What's wrong?" he questioned as soon as we left the hall and walked down the school corridors. "We need to tell somebody about your demon side," I said seriously. He stopped in his tracks and turned to face me, his eyes hard, and he cleared his throat, straightening his posture. "Firstly, by telling somebody we could actually make sense of it, maybe even understand it," I began, walking towards him gravely. He started. "Secondly," I shouted, backing him into the wall, "what happens if the school comes up with a weapon to kill all demon-blooded creatures? Did you think about that?" He hung his head and looked at the floor in thought. "Shade, I know you're hurting," I said more softly. "How could you know that?" he questioned, bringing his fiery eyes up to meet mine. "No, seriously. Tell me, how could you possibly know how I feel?" he shouted, taking angry steps towards me. I backed up and hit my back on the other wall of the corridor. "The connection," I screamed without thinking. "What?" he questioned. I brought my eyes up to meet his to see that they had softened. I let out a sigh and straightened myself out. "I can use it to feel your emotions," I said quietly. He opened his mouth to say something but closed it again. We continued to stare at each other before he finally spoke. "You feel that too?" he whispered. I nodded slowly, only now realizing how close to each other we were. He silently continued to look into my eyes as if he was searching for answers. I stood frozen at our close proximity, taking in his unusual scent. He smelt of pine. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm." A faint hint of peppermint. "You're nervous." Searching my face, I shook my head in disagreement, but felt my heart pounding against my rib cage. I tried my best to calm it down, praying that he didn't hear it. He moved a strand of hair from my face slowly and backed up hesitantly, never taking his eyes from mine. "Fine. We will tell the principal," he concluded, breaking our eye contact. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and gave him a faint smile. Let's go," I stuttered. I began walking down the hallway towards Principal Stoneheart's office. I hated how much power Shay had over me. It's strange. I've never felt that way around anyone. It's hard to describe, but when I look into his eyes, the whole world stops. It's just us, frozen in time. He makes me feel nervous, but at the same time, he makes everything seem like it's going to be okay. I know that sounds cheesy, but it's how I feel, and to be honest, I don't think that I could change it if I tried. I came out of my thoughts and approached the door to his office. I knocked on it 3 times before entering. "Mr. Stoneheart." Walking into the dark room, "Stop," shouted Shade, grabbing my arm. I stopped in my tracks and turned to face him with a questioning look on my face. "I can smell blood," he whispered. I took in the disgusting metallic smell and pulled out my dagger, advancing into the room slowly. I nodded to Shade and he flicked on the light, illuminating the room. My blood turned to a frozen slush in my veins as I took in the horrific scene before me. Principal Stoneheart was slumped backwards over his chair with a large silver blade protruding from his chest. I dropped my arms to my sides and gasped, looking over the blood that was pooled below him and splattered all over the walls. I hesitantly walked towards his lifeless corpse, noticing that there was a note attached to the blade. I broke it off the handle and read it aloud. "To the school's famous Mythica, Aurora, join us to release your father, to rule in power and victory, or join the others and die a torturous death like your principal." As soon as I had finished reading it, the note went up in flames, sending a cloud of ash to coat the bloodstained floor. "Torturous death." I looked over to Principal Stoneheart's dead body to see that his eyes were pure black, which meant that he was hexed to endure as much pain that his body could physically cope with before death. I watched silently as Shade walked over to him and closed his eyes. "Non libera animum tuam," he mumbled softly, bowing his head. "Your soul is now free." I stared at the floor and thought of the note. "Your father." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Sebastian is my father. Tears filled my eyes, blurring my vision. I looked up at Shade as one escaped and rolled swiftly down my cheek. His mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear him. The note's message still stabbed through my mind. Sebastian is my father. It was all too much. I know I said I wouldn't be seen as weak, but this was different. I closed my eyes and sobbed quietly. I felt a pair of comforting arms wrap around me, but I stayed still. I couldn't move to return the embrace. All I could do was cry into his chest and take in his calming scent to mask the blood. Shade is wrong. He isn't the monster. I am. Chapter 23. I pulled away from Shade and looked up at him. I know what you're thinking. But our parents don't define who we are. We make that decision for ourselves, comforted Shade, as he wiped the tears from my soaked face. I nodded my head and wiped away the remaining tears from my face. He continued to look at me with concerned eyes, so I cleared my throat and tried my best to put on a cheery tone. We should go and tell someone. About Stoneheart, I said, heading towards the door. I moved through the frame quickly but felt myself being pulled backwards by a strong pair of arms. Are you sure you're okay? Shade asked as he turned me around to face him. What I wanted to say was no. No, I wasn't okay. Everything I have ever known about my family just crumbled away, leaving a confusing mess in its place. But instead, I snapped out of my thoughts and placed my hand on his arm. I'm fine, I lied, giving him a fake smile. He gave me a look that told me that he didn't believe me, but he left it alone and broke our eye contact. He let go of my arm and advanced quickly down the corridor with me following closely behind him. Following the death of the Mr. Stoneheart, there was a new principal appointed to the academy, and the Elysium Guard was sent to investigate the situation. I wasn't surprised when they found out that there was a traitor in the academy, because there is no way that somebody could just walk through the school's borders and murder the principal on their own. But the question was who? Mr. Alban, the new principal, led Mr. Stoneheart's death funeral ceremony, before assuring us that the traitor would be caught and dealt with by the guard. The elite team training has resumed, and the principal has decided not to tell the school about my newfound parentage and Shade's demon side. He assured us that doing so would just cause unnecessary problems for the both of us, although we did tell our friends. So basically, the school has gone back to the way it was, as if nothing had happened, as if nothing was wrong. They were in denial. The war was coming whether they wanted it to or not. We couldn't prevent it, but we can win it, and get rid of Sebastian for good. Everybody settle down, commanded Mr. Alban. I sighed heavily and slumped further down into my chair and rested my face in my hands. Thank you, he said, nodding his head. The regional games are in 2 days, so do your best to train for them in the time that is given to you. How is this still happening after the principal's death? Whispered Shade as he turned around to face me. A distraction. I just have a really bad feeling about it. Concern flashing across his eyes, I averted my attention back to the stage to see that Asher was standing next to the principal. As you're fully aware, there is a traitor within our school, said Asher, looking annoyed. A couple of angered murmurs broke out but were silenced immediately by Mr. Alban holding up his hand. I promise that me and my elite team will find the traitor and deal with them as the Elysium Guard seems fit. I scanned the crowd for any sort of clues as to who the traitor would be. They would definitely look scared right now. The Elysium Guard were known for their high skill and ruthless fighting. Some people were cheering or nodding their heads, but none showed any of the signs that I was looking for. I turned to face the others. Are you guys all free after training? I asked, looking around the table. No, I have. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. Thing, said Chase hesitantly. I rose my eyebrow at him and watched as his cheeks reddened. Same, shouted Zach and Sylvia at the same time. Try both immediately blushed and looked down at the table. What the hell is going on with them? I thought to myself as I took in their awkward appearance. What thing? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. Rambled Chase. A smile grew on my face as he continued to make things worse for himself. Fine. I'll look for myself, I laughed. Chase relaxed slightly and let out a small chuckle. I entered his mind and immediately saw. Unicorn's probably an attempt to block me out and... Elizabeth, when were you going to tell me? I asked telepathically through our link. I'm sorry. A lot has happened lately and I didn't think that you would find it important, he replied. My heart sank. Why wouldn't he think his life is important to me? He's my family. I will always make time for you. You guys are my family and whatever is going on in my messed up life can wait. You guys come first. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Zach and Max nodded and relaxed into their chairs. So Zach, anything you want to confess? Sylvia and I have kinda been dating, he said quietly. I could feel his anxious emotions flooding through the link as he waited for my response. I can't believe you both didn't tell me, but I'm happy for all of you. Do you think they're your mates? I shouted excitedly. I watched as they all covered their temples and shot me a glare. Sorry, I apologized sheepishly. We're not sure, they both replied, but Zach looked more decided than Chase. I laughed to myself as their cheeks flared up. They have good enough reasons not to come, I said to the others out loud. They looked at me in confusion and then shook it off when they realized that we had a private conversation. Is everyone else coming? They all agreed just as the bell rang loudly around the room. We all got up with a sigh and walked down to training. I promised myself that I wasn't going to get too caught up in my own life again. My friends were really important to me, so they deserved to have someone to talk to about their own problems without feeling afraid that I won't listen. Chapter 24. The day of the regional games had finally arrived. Excitement and anticipation radiated off onlooking students. As we marched down the hallway in our silver house uniforms forming an impressive V-shape behind Axel, I took in a deep breath and to the eager buzz of various cheers and chants of support as we made our way down the field. We stopped at the edge of the field and watched as the water region and the fire region lined up ready to begin the games. Nervous? Asked Chase. Over the ear, splitting echo of the bell that signaled the start of the game. Not yet, I smiled. I looked back to the game to see somebody spiraling towards the ground with an arrow sticking out of their chest. I gulped hard and looked back at Chase. Well, I am, he said in astonishment. These games are intense. I nodded my head and continued to watch the game alongside Chase until cheers erupted from the crowd, signaling the victory of the fire region. We clapped out of respect and watched their gleeful faces as they left the field. After a couple of minutes of people being carried away to heal on stretchers and the handing out of flags, the next game began. Air and Earth. Lucky for us, we didn't have to compete in this round since it would be unfair on us and our dragons to do two continuous games. So half of our original team led the game. We watched closely as our team battled the Earth region fiercely, making the whole game swift and simple. So we beat Earth in a record time and minimum injuries, so we were set to compete against House Fire to decide the overall champion. I turned to look at Chase, who seemed to look slightly calmer now that our team had won, but he still watched anxiously as the team began to filter out of the field so it could be prepped for the next game. Our game? Come on. You two need to eat something, Axel said while approaching us quickly. He didn't bother waiting for our response before dragging us off to sit at a table. I saw that Shade was already there and took a seat opposite him. What's after the dragon teams? Asked Chase as he slumped down beside me. General Combat, answered Shade. Chase nodded his head before basically inhaling a sandwich. I sighed quietly and took a small sip of my water to calm my developing nerves. Where the hell is Orpheus anyway? I asked, noticing his absence. Shade and Chase looked around and gave a small shrug. That little shit better show up, shouted Axel from across the table. I swear, that boy has super hearing when he wants to. He will. I laughed confidently, but Shade looked unsure. We talked strategy with Axel and the other teammates until the bell rang out, signaling the winning team to get ready. Who won? Asked Jackson, who was one of our teammates and had also arrived late us. Replied Axel with a competitive look on his face. Okay, remember guys, this is our year. Hitting his hand to quick beats. We copied his gesture and gave a small cheer to make him happy. "Everyone get into formation," he said eagerly. We jogged back into our V shape and walked strongly into the field with our heads held high. I may have looked calm from the outside, but butterflies swarmed my stomach, making me churn uncontrollably with nerves, resting an uncomfortable feeling in my gut. I pushed my nerves aside the best that I could and focused my attention on obsidian. "Get ready," boomed the magnified voice of Mr. Alban. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." And Felix, the Fire Region's captain, joined their right hands in front of them, but each held a flag in their left. Fire erupted from their joined hands and was blown around in a circle by the wind that Axel generated. They broke contact and bowed to each other before stepping back towards their teams. I shifted my weight around on my feet while I waited for what seemed like an eternity for the starting bell to finally go throughout the field. As if on cue, the dragon's thunderous roars were heard from above us, making us all glance up in anticipation. Our team's dragons each swooped down gracefully in turn, allowing us to grab a hold of them as they flew past to make a dramatic exit. Memories of Axel shouting at me to teach them, but particular trick flashed through my mind, making me smile and momentarily forget my nerves, but before I knew what was happening I was whisked away by obsidian, ascending into the air at a tremendous speed. I pulled myself fully onto his back and frantically scanned the field for the flag holders. Hellsfire, who were now on their dragons, had their defenders from a protective circle around their guardians, making it almost impossible to access the flags. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I signaled over to Chase and pointed at the exposed base above the opposing team. He caught on to what I was planning and flew with me, shooting arrows at the other team's assailants. Chase and I swooped down swiftly through the gap and crashed into the Guardians. Dragon fire blazed everywhere, making it hard for us to avoid being scorched. A couple of people screamed in pain and plummeted to the ground along with their dragons, only to stop before they hit the floor and thumped down gently. Obsidian continued to battle the opposing dragon while I was thinking up a plan. "Come on, come on, come on," I mumbled to myself, narrowly dodging an approaching arrow. I had finally formulated a plan when two assailants closed in on me. I drew my own bow and shot arrows as quickly as I could, but they were blocked easily. I cursed under my breath and braced myself for the pain, but it never struck. I looked back at the assailant to see Orpheus in his place with a big grin on his face. "Finally decided to show your face?" I questioned, returning the smile. I wasted no more time and shot up into the air. Adrenaline surged powerfully through my veins, making me feel invincible as I swiftly grabbed a flag off a guardian. I smiled widely and dropped back down hurriedly towards our own guardians to pass the flag when a burning pain pounded through my shoulder, with enough force to send me tumbling over the side of obsidian. I screamed out in pain as various shapes and colors swirled past me. I can still do this, I thought with determination. If I were to land on the ground holding the flag, then it would be given to my team. I pushed aside the overwhelming sense of terror that I was literally plummeting to my death and forced my body to swivel around, ignoring the excruciating pain that surged through my shoulder. I stretched my hand out in front of me so that I was falling head first, and reached out for the flag. Everything slowed down around me as I strained under the pressure. Death was no longer my concern. I wasn't going to stay dead. The protection borders wouldn't allow it, so technically, I didn't have anything to worry about. With that slightly comforting thought in my mind, I closed my fingers around the flag and sighed with relief. I closed my eyes tightly as I continued to fall and waited for the impact. Chapter 25. I crashed onto a hard surface far too quickly and was engulfed by something warm wrapping around me. I cracked open my eyes to see. "Game's not over yet, princess," he grinned, looking down at my bewildered face. Shade saved me. Who knew he had it in him? I attempted to sit up at the same time his dragon. Ink and row tilted speedily to block an oncoming blast of dragon fire. I groaned at the pain of the arrow and looked up at Shade, who was still clutching onto me as if his life depended on it. Ink Endro swerved again, and Shade tightened his grip, making me cry out in pain as the arrow shifted around in the open wound. "Do you mind?" I asked in a raspy voice. He looked down at me with concern until his eyes landed on the arrow. "Oh yeah, sorry," he said, snapping off the end of it. We dipped down and then scored back up into the air, making it extremely difficult for Shade to hold on to me and remove the arrow. I did my best to force myself into an upright position, leaning my head onto his shoulder. I clamped my jaw together to resist the out in pain and gripped his arm tightly. He yanked the arrow out of my shoulder carefully and threw it down towards the ground. The pain immediately lessened, and I pulled back and thanked him. I quickly called Obsidian, who was probably searching the ground for me, and watched impatiently as my shoulder healed thanks to the protective borders and both my vampire and werewolf sides. "Thanks," I said awkwardly as Shade grinned in my direction. "I guess you owe me," he replied smugly as he handed me back the flag. I rolled my eyes at him and shook my head just as Obsidian's loud roar sounded below us. Ink Endro turned sharply again, but this time I allowed myself to fall directly onto Obsidian's back, still clutching onto the flag. As soon as I landed on his back, we soared up through the chaos, straight towards Jackson, who was a guardian. I turned Obsidian completely sideways, gripped onto him as tightly as I could with my left hand, and held the flag in my right. We squeezed through to assailants and passed Jackson the flag successfully. I was passing for just enough time to see his amazed face as he took in our technique. I smiled to myself and continued to race around, teaming up with the others to steal the flags efficiently, and pass them to the Guardians. The finishing bell sounded, signaling the end of the game, and all sorts of chants and cheers sounded from the crowd. I looked around frantically to try and see who had won, but immediately knew that we had when my eyes fell on Axel. A humongous smile was spread on his face, and he punched the air with his right fist, and turned towards Felix, winking playfully at his scowling face. We had actually done it. We won the game. I flew behind Axel, with Chase by my side, as we descended towards the ground. We all landed with a small thud and formed a straight line. "The Fire Region's winning streak is now broken," boomed Mr. Alban. "Elements of the air are your new champions." The clapping and cheering became louder, filling me with a sense of pure pride. I wasn't sure about joining the team at first, but I'm grateful that I did. To be a part of something so special was among the best feelings in the world. We dismounted from our dragons and began to form another line in front of them. I noticed that Axel groaned in pain as he jumped down from Mace Dana and limped heavily as he attempted to walk. I swiftly ran over to him and placed his arm around my shoulder for support. Chase also noticed us and did the same the other side. "What happened?" I whispered. "Oh," he replied with a grunt. "The borders should heal it soon." I nodded my head. Axel was not a vampire or werewolf hybrid, so he would heal off the protective borders alone, so it takes far longer for him to heal. We took him to the center of the line and watched briefly as he was handed the trophy that now had the Hauser logo upon it, as well as Axel's name positioned under team captain. He held it up in the air and shouted happily, causing everyone, including us, to join in. After the fire team had left the arena, we followed after them with beaming faces. We dropped Axel off at the medical wing before heading back towards the tables to meet the others. "Well done," squealed Verity, engulfing me in a tight hug. "You guys were awesome," exclaimed Zach, who had his arm wrapped around Sylvia. I smiled joyfully as my heart warmed at the sight. I also noticed that Elizabeth Alcalizzi sat a few feet from Max. As soon as she saw Chase, she got to her feet and ran over to him. "I'm glad you're all okay," she said happily. She hugged Chase lightly, making his cheeks turn a rosy red. She then grabbed his hand and pulled him over to sit next to her. Noticing that Max was sitting rather awkwardly by himself, I moved to sit down next to him. "Are you ready for the next class?" Stealing one of his fries. "I suppose so. I just don't like the idea of killing our friends," he replied honestly. I took what he said into consideration and my heart sank. He was right. This wasn't like fighting demons. We were going to have to fight our own friends to the death. I know that they cannot actually die, but you were still technically killing them. "I know. It's a stupid tradition," I said, looking up into his soft chocolate eyes. He nodded his head in agreement and slid the tray of fries closer to me. You and Shade are the best warriors in our year, so I'll be surprised if you two don't make it to the top, said Max, pulling a stray leaf from my hair. Even if you do manage to beat my amazing skill, are you sure that you are going to be able to kill me? Asked Shade cock-eye as he sat down beside me. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I've been waiting for a chance to kill you since the first time I saw you, I replied with an evil smirk. He tapped his hand to his heart and faked hurt. You know you love me, really claimed, a pout forming on his face. Keep telling yourself that, I grinned. I watched as he continued to fake hurt and amusement. It was crazy to think that I literally couldn't stayed of this boy not long ago. I had convinced myself that he was some super serial killer in his spare time or something, but it turns out that he really was just an idiotic, sarcastic, arrogant asshole who became less of an idiotic, sarcastic, arrogant asshole when you got to know him. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Some things still didn't add up, but to be honest, I was too scared to ask him about it. The possibility that the ants could make things go back to the way they were scared the hell out of me. Angelo and Sapphire, please make your way to the combat ring, instructed Mr. Alban with his insanely magnified voice. I guess we should make our way over there, said Zack, removing his arm from Sylvia's shoulder. He stood up and held out his hand for her to take. She took it instantly and they began to walk the direction of the combat ring. Shade got to his feet and grinned widely, mimicking Zack's actions. Holding his hand out to me, Princess, he said in an overdramatic, old-fashioned accent. I rolled my eyes and grabbed his hand, but instead of using it to pull myself up, I pulled him to the ground and got to my feet by myself. Thank you, I chimed sarcastically as I stepped over his body. He let out a loud groan and grabbed my foot and pulled me down to the floor, making me face plant into the soft grass. No problem, he chuckled, stepping over me, mirroring my previous actions. I pushed myself to my feet in shock at his quick reaction and used my vampiric speed to catch up to him and whack him on the back of the head. Oh, he moaned, rubbing the spot where I hit him. I looked at his annoyed face and burst out laughing. His hair was sticking up in all directions and there was a big mud mark on his left cheek. I pointed to it in response to his questioning look and he scrubbed it away quickly, narrowing his eyes at me. Orpheus and Max came up either side of us and Shade cleared his throat and ran a hand through his hair to straighten it back out. I guess we will finally get a chance to kill each other, voiced Shade, looking over to Orpheus. I guess we will, he replied confidently. Chapter 26. We approached the main combat ring to see Sapphire hovering above Angelo with a blade cast through his heart. She pulled out the sword, allowing his body turn limp and fall backwards. Some cheers were heard, but Sapphire did not look happy. She had blood splattered all over her face and had a big gash traveling down her arm. She leaned over, resting her hands on her sword, and watched in relief as the medics carried Angelo out of the ring to heal. We all watched each opponent carefully, identifying their strengths and weaknesses until Chase was called into the ring to fight Hunter. I held back a gasp and watched horrified as Chase made his way confidently into the ring. Chase and Hunter literally despised each other, so they were likely to become blinded by rage. The boys bowed to each other before walking away a few paces to draw their weapons. Cypre instructed the principal. Begin. Hunter immediately lunged forwards, but Chase dodged the attack easily. He spun back to face Hunter and circled him slowly. Hunter lunged again, but this time more aggressively, catching Chase's arm. Blood trickled quickly down his arm, causing Chase to growl angrily. He ducked under another swing of Hunter's blade before twirling one way but striking the other, sending Hunter to the ground. Chase brought his blade down towards Hunter's chest, but he rolled out of the way, causing the blade to pierce his shoulder. He screamed painfully and transformed into his wolf form. He used this new element of surprise to take Chase off of his feet and bite a big chunk out of his unprotected side. Chase screamed in agony and transformed into his own wolf form. The two boys fought ferociously in a blur of brown and grey fur until a loud yelp sounded and the two grew still. Chase stood up from Hunter, unhappily causing me to release a breath that I had somehow managed to hold. Hunter changed back into his human form but remained limp. Chase watched him for a few seconds before he jumped off his fixed body, transformed back to his human form. But during the transition, Hunter leapt up into the air and thrust his blade through Chase's back. Chase fell to his knees and screamed out. My heart broke as he knelt there, helpless. I was just about to leap into the arena when Chase noticed me and shook his head. He forced himself to his feet and stumbled forwards, freeing himself from the blade. Hunter threw it forwards again in anger, but Chase spun around and caught it, holding it in both of his hands. Blood dripped from his torn hands onto the arena floor. Chase looked up towards Hunter, pure hatred in his eyes, and cast the sword to the side. He pulled his own dagger from his belt and jammed it into the side of Hunter's throat. He gurgled feebly on his own blood and helplessly at his neck before falling to the floor with a loud thud. Chase dropped his stained blade and fell down to the floor himself, earning a gasp from the crowd. Without thinking twice, I leapt over the fence and ran to his side. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Can you hear me? I asked quickly. He nodded his head and grunted what I assumed was a yes. I watched as the medics took Hunter away and screamed for them to hurry up. His head rested on my thighs and I looked down at his worried face. "You gotta be fine," I said quickly. Of course he knew this, but everything felt so real, so I wanted to reassure him. I sat there, just staring at his pale face with sheer horror filling my heart. I don't know what I would do if this were real. I don't think I could live if I had to lose him. He was my best friend. My first friend. The medics ran over and took him away to heal, and Shade appeared at my side and pulled me out of the arena. "He's going to be okay," he could, dropping small circles into my back. "I know," I replied, "but it all looks and feels so real." He nodded his head and I turned to face him. "I don't want to kill you," I decided quickly. His features softened for a second before he regained his usual grin. "What makes you think that you'll have a chance?" he asked playfully. A smile tugged at my head, hit him gently on the arm. "Come on, let's go and wait for him to wake up," I laughed, walking towards the medical wing. We sat outside on the bench with Lizzie, Max, and Orpheus for what seemed like hours before Chase and Hunter emerged completely healed up. Chase walked over to us and I immediately stood up and wrapped my arms around him. I embraced him tightly for at least a whole minute before pulling away. "Whoa, you're acting as if I died or something," laughed Chase with a wink. Lizzie got to her feet and quickly approached Chase. She wrapped her arms around his neck and crashed her lips onto his. At first he was frozen in shock, but then he relaxed into her contact and kissed her back. They pulled away from each other with bright red faces. "Well, that's our cue," laughed Max, turning towards the door. We followed him out to give them some privacy and headed back to the arena. I sat down on a wooden bench next to Max and shifted to put my feet on his lap. Just like old times, he laughed while rolling his eyes. I laughed softly and tilted my head up to look at the clouds. "Hey," said Orpheus, sitting down next to me. I reopened my eyes and looked over my shoulder to see his calm but alert face. "Where were you this morning?" I asked curiously. His smile wavered slightly and he cleared his throat. "I was caught up with something," he said, tapping his foot nervously. I took my feet off Max's lap and turned to face him. "You fidget when you're nervous. What is it?" With a small smile, he stopped moving and smiled sheepishly at me. "You noticed that?" he asked, scratching the back of his neck. I beckoned him to continue and he let out a sigh. "I can't tell you. Not yet anyway," he said mysteriously. I rolled my eyes and a smile played on his lips, already knowing that I wouldn't push him further. "Okay then, mystery man," I said sarcastically. "I guess you can be my human cushion to make it up to me." He shoved me gently with his shoulder and laughed quietly. I leant up against the side of his torso and he wrapped his arm around me. I yawned and closed my eyes, attempting to drift off to sleep. We were going to have to wait a long time, so I may as well get comfortable. Besides, I would need to be fully recharged if I am going to win my fight against Shade. Chapter 27. Shade's POV. I watched furiously as Orpheus wrapped his arm around Aurora. I seriously felt like running over to that bench and ripping her away from him. The only thing that stopped me was the fact that I didn't deserve her either. I had treated her so badly when we first met. I remember seeing her angry face when I acted so cold towards her. But I could see past those walls that she had so cleverly put up. She was confused. Confused as to why a complete stranger was being a dick to her for no other reason other than the fact that he hated how she made him feel. So to break it down, I didn't know how to react to a sort feeling towards a person that didn't contain pure hatred, so I did the only thing that I'm good at. I made her hate me. It didn't take me long to discover that we were connected, so I used our bond to try and keep her away. The electricity, as she calls it, was supposed to bring us together, but I used it to break us apart. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my annoyance, the fate tattoos ascribed them still managed to mark us, but somehow, in spite of all of this, she still forgave me, and even considers me as her friend. But I know that I can't get used to it. Everyone leaves eventually. It was just a matter of time before she sees me the way that everybody else does. Earth to shade called Max, calling me from my thoughts. What? I replied while running a hand through my hair. Look, he whispered, motioning behind me. I casually looked behind me to see a hooded figure masked by the shadows of the judge's box. I looked back towards Max and motioned him to follow me. What's wrong? Asked Orpheus. We've got it, I hissed before turning my head back towards the box. Without waiting for his response, I took off towards the figure at a quick run. I knew that this was probably a trap, but I've had bad feelings about these games for weeks, so I wasn't about to ignore some random guy watching us from the shadows. The figure disappeared around the box, so I motioned Max to go around the other side so we could meet in the middle. I drew one of my daggers and ran swiftly around the corner to come face to face with only Max. Where is he? We both asked at the same time. We scanned the area quickly and turned back to each other. I knew that my eyes held the same amount of confusion that Max's did. Where the hell could he have gone? I asked. We're basically in an open field. I don't know. He just disappeared, said Max. Aurora and shade to the combat ring, sounded Mr. Alban. I turned my attention back to Max in confusion. You two aren't supposed to fight until the end, he stated, taking the words out of my mouth. We looked around the field one last time before we ran back over to the bench to see that Aura was awakened, to my greatest satisfaction. No longer in the arms of Orpheus. I guess this is it, she said softly, looking up at me with her beautiful purple eyes. My stomach churned in anticipation as I looked back and forth. From her to the combat ring. I have a really bad feeling about this, I said honestly. What? Scared of losing? Laughed Orpheus. Our eyes instantly locked and I tried to project as much hatred as I possibly could towards him. Something seems off, mumbled Max seriously. It's going to be fine, laughed Aurora. I nodded my head, but I couldn't believe her. Let's go then, I said, offering a thin smile. She smiled warmly back at me and led the way to the combat ring. I watched my feet stretch out in front of me as I trod slowly through the sand arena. To tell you the truth, I didn't want to kill her either, but I kept calm in the thought that she probably wouldn't give me the chance to. Never have I seen somebody who fights as ferociously as she did to protect her friends. She was a born warrior. But then again, I am one of those friends. So will she be able to do it? I guess I'll have to wait and find out. We bowed down to each other and took a few paces away to draw our daggers. It's strange how we even choose the same weapons, I thought to myself as I studied her twinned daggers. Inside Prague ended Mr. Alban. I snapped my head up to look at Aurora. He previously soft features had hardened and her eyes held no emotion. She summoned lightning to surround her daggers and looked over to me. A power of an unknown force filled her darkened eyes, feeding her strength. She was like a different person. She hurled the lightning at me and I gasped at its sheer speed and strength. I fell to the floor in a bundle of shame and agony. I sprung to my feet and my vision blurred. This didn't feel like Aurora. I dodged her powerful blasts left and right. exhausting my body until it screamed for me to stop. I forced myself to continue, to strike back. The anxious crowd had diffused out of existence in my mind. It was just me and her. I ran towards her and fell to the floor, allowing myself to skid past her. I slashed her leg with my dagger and warm blood splattered all over my face. She screamed out and turned to face me. Her eyes were no longer purple. They were of a blood orange color. I was right. This wasn't Aurora. She was possessed by something purely evil. I screamed in determination and pushed myself to my feet. I ran straight towards her and we engaged in combat. Our daggers clashed multiple times and I somehow managed to block every attack. Sweat trickled down my forehead. But still, I pushed on. Our daggers caught together and I looked deep into her dark, soulless eyes. Aurora, I screamed desperately, fight it. A wave of brilliant purple came over her eyes and she loosened her grip on her daggers. That's it. Come back to me, I whispered softly, cupping her cheek in my hand. An surplusing cry sounded above us. I looked up to see there were demons everywhere. Screams erupted from the crowds as more demons emerged and tore through the students without mercy. I stayed still, frozen as if my blood had decided to harden in my veins, taking away my movement. I gasped loudly as I felt a blade into my chest. Fear filled me as the icy blade scraped the surface of my heart. I looked forward to see that Aurora's eyes were still a dark orange. It wasn't her fault, I told myself firmly. It's not her. I held my blade to her throat and pressed against it hard, allowing a small amount of blood to trickle down her neck. Kill me and you kill her, the words flowed out of her mouth like poison. But they were not her own. The voice was thunder-ousty low and full of menace. It was the kind of voice that sends shivers down your spine. The kind that makes you want to cower in fear. It was right. I couldn't kill her. I dropped my daggers to the floor. Fire flowed from my stomach up to my throat, making me groan and cough out blackened blood. She twisted the blade and I fell to my knees but never broke our eye contact. The remaining space between the blade and my heart closed as the deadly blade slipped into my heart. I spat of one last mouthful of blood and looked up at her, Aurora, whose eyes had turned back to the usual enchanting purple color. Her features had softened into panic and tears streamed down her face. She pulled the dagger out and caught my dying body. I'm sorry, she cried, laying my head onto her lap. I pushed back the pain and tried to find my voice. Wasn't I began, but each word felt like my throat was being scratched with sandpaper. She pressed her finger to my lips and shook her head. Don't try to talk. You're going to be okay, she lied. I looked up at her one last time before I slipped into darkness, thinking over what she said. Was I going to be okay? The demons had broken the protective borders. Aurora was my only hope. She had a power that she couldn't even imagine to understand. So if anyone could heal me, it was her. But if she did this, she would become weak and could possibly face death herself. So I couldn't allow her to try. So even though the darkness threatened to consume me, I clung to the light, to the hope that it could keep my life and live to see her again.